All right, y'all. How's it going? Sorry about the slow start. My water heater went out, so I've been underneath it all day fixing it up. But I think it is warming up now, so crisis averted. But I appreciate y'all being a little patient with me. I had to do some home repair. Um, but welcome everybody this week's Griscom stream. You're going to be seeing a lot of me this week because Matt Leck is out on vacation. But we have a really fun show coming for y'all tomorrow. We just recorded an interview with Natalie Scher. People should be familiar with her writing in places like The Nation, New Republic, and her most recent piece in Jacobin magazine on the end of the AOC honeymoon. We take a little bit of a deep dive into what might feel really long, but is a pretty short period of history, which is AOC's, existence as an elected official. Sort of talk about some of the success and the tensions that we see with having figures like AOC, in really high positions are very notable, and what kind of relationship we need to start demanding and building. I think is the most important way to think about it, building with the left and elected officials like that. But looking forward to that. And also, in the post game tomorrow, since Matt is gone, we're going to be joined by none other than Professor Ben Burgess of the Joe Rogan Experience fame. We're going to be taking calls and questions and hanging out for a little bit. In the post game, the Patreon only post game. Subscribe at patreon.com/left reckoning to get all of that. Yeah, and we got a lot of really exciting things coming up. I'll be on vacation next week, so you'll be able to get your double dose of Matt Leck then. But we have some really, really fun conversations coming up in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be doing a deep dive into how the Democratic Party lost and sort of still doesn't understand what has happened in rural America, and much, much more. So lots to get excited for, y'all. Well, yeah, I'm really happy to start getting some questions from folks. Remember, um, I'm looking at both the chat from Twitch and YouTube. Really happy to sort of take a little bit of time. I can't stick around too late today because it's my sister's birthday, but I wanted to check in nonetheless. So maybe start with a couple stories. So why don't we start with this while y'all are, feel free to drop questions in there and I'll get to them as we go. But let's start here with this pretty despicable story from our boy, Mitch McConnell, who is again standing in the way of feeding people, feeding children. McConnell is blocking extension of free school lunch waivers. Nearly half of Kentucky's children live in households below 200% of the federal poverty line. I was one of them. He doesn't see us, said U.S. Senate candidate Charles Booker, who, God, it'd be great if we were able to see him win. But let's read the first couple bits here. Federal waivers that have given U.S. schools the flexibility to offer universal free lunches throughout the pandemic are at risk of ending as Senate Republicans, led by Mitch McConnell, stonewall proposed extension of the relief measures, potentially depriving millions of children of no-cost meals in coming months. Politico reported Monday that McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, is forcefully opposing a provision to extend the federal school lunch waivers as part of an omnibus government funding package that Congress must pass by midnight Friday to avert a shutdown. The USDA has estimated that the average school district will face a 40% cut in federal reimbursements for meals if Congress allows the waivers, first approved in March 2020 and extended thereafter, to lapse. The USDA's authority to extend the school meal waivers further is currently set to expire at the end of June. Mitch McConnell, this is from Booker. Mitch McConnell never needed free lunch to get a hot meal at school. He never needed food stamps to survive, Charles Booker, a Democratic U.S. Senate candidate in Kentucky, wrote in response to the GOP's leader's obstruction. Nearly half of Kentucky's children live in households below 200% of the federal poverty line. I was one of them. He doesn't see us. And Lord, I mean, the reality is that many of us were reliant on free school lunches, myself being one of them. Those were large meals that I could enjoy in times when my family was really struggling. And It's so nasty to watch people like McConnell and the GOP in general, continue to wage this war on not just the poor but poor children. Um, and it's despicable to remember the fact that across the country, uh, because of purposeful underfunding, the meals that we get at schools are not as healthy and nutritious as they should be. And the only way we're going to be able to break through this, and this is what makes socialists different from liberals on these questions, um, is the demand that we make these things universal. And what we mean by that is that if the free lunch, right, is the lunch that people get when they go to school, um, and you are making that universal, so that everybody who's going into that cafeteria has access without having to pay for those meals. I'll tell you right now, the quality will increase because the funding will be there because I'm sure people who've spent time in a high school or middle school, recently, or people like me who aren't too far away from those days, will remember that there is a two-tiered system at the vast majority of high school, at school cafeterias in the country, right? There is the line you go to where you can get, your meal for free if you're on free or reduced lunch program. And then there is the paid lunch line, right? Which tends to be a lot nicer, has fresher ingredients, and hell, the line seems to move a lot quicker. And this is the kind of bastardization of public goods that we've seen in this country through years of austerity and neoliberalism, that really target not only like the most poor amongst us, but they target like any kind of sense of community. Right? There's class hierarchy in those kind of systems. There are people. You can tell. At least in my case, you could tell where somebody lived and what their parents did by what they were having for lunch. And that's a real shame because public schools are probably one of the few and best examples in this country of things that really do represent a kind of collective democratic ownership. And the right wing and the wealthy have been at war with those concepts from the get go. And I think that one, we should certainly support any efforts here to fight for extension of these large scale school lunch programs, and two, start to demand that we have universal lunch, universal free lunch at schools, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to scale up to the level that we'll be able to provide nicer food and healthier food for our children as they're getting educated across the country. Um, yeah, I mean, we got plenty of folks. I mean, this is my high school had a cooperative run cafeteria. I'm curious how that worked. That got me through tough times growing up. Um, Michael says at my school, people that got free lunches had a card or something that they punched. Definitely a stigma, but it wasn't a separate line, at least not literally. Yeah, I mean, obviously you could go and you could get it paid. I was mentioning that. I mean, maybe this is different at your school too. Um, we had like the cafeteria line, and like certain people like me who got free lunch. We would go and we'd swipe a card, and you couldn't tell the difference. But frankly, I also went to a school where there was a lot of, it was one of the poorest school districts in the country. Um, but there was also like a separate line outside that had a shack that had like chicken tenders and pizza and sandwiches and burgers that were of a much higher quality than what you were getting in the main line. But I will say, I want to give our lunch ladies and lunch the people who work behind the counter credit. I mean, they cook some really great meals with what was very clearly a limited supplies. I mean, the one good thing about Southern cooking is that it's sort of developed around making do without a lot. but for us, I mean, there's just very clearly, the money was going in one direction. So of course, that's capitalism for you, right? That's market economy. There was money in one thing, and these are underfunded school systems. So of course, the people who end up getting the investment and getting taken care of the most are the people who are spending, $5, $6, $7 on their lunch versus the people who are having it subsidized, by the federal government. But I'm sorry, nobody should be hungry at school. I mean, this is basic human stuff. And I think you always have to have the two sides of that fight in your head. We're sort of saying like no to this ridiculous overnight kind of cut from McConnell and his ilk. But two, like these things should be expanded across the board. It's one of those things that was so frustrating. It's like there's this push under Michelle Obama, to have healthier school lunches. But if you don't meet that with a kind of serious investment and serious community, you just end. I mean, people who are parents or people who might have been in the school systems during that period of time could probably attest to this. And depending on where you live, but they basically created very restrictive guidelines for what could and could not be served. And I'm sorry if you're trying to operate, your budget at the lowest level. What ends up fitting into the new guidelines for what is served in cafeterias across this country is sort of absurd. Especially when people are young and growing and are hungry, especially when as the case for many people who were poor working class, like that was like probably one of the most stable meals that you were going to get during the week. It is sort of unfair to start tinkering with those things if you're not matching it with a serious funding investment, and I would argue too like a universalization of it as well. um, yeah. Well, I'm happy to start getting into some questions, comments, things like that. So get those in there. But we have a piece of good news. We balance these things out a little bit, fair and balanced over here. Um, this is another social service that has been under attack for a very very long time in this country. Um, Observer says there's no such thing as a free lunch. Why should I forfeit any of my rents on my tenements to feed the useless eaters? Their rents are meant to feed me. Yeah, that's an attitude. Here's the good news. Oh Lord, there is a 404 link on this link. Just give me 1 second, y'all. Doing live television. Here we go. This is big. Oh Lord, I'm sorry. I need to get rid of this message or it'll be there the whole time. This is pretty big right here, y'all. Sorry for here we go. APWU, the American Postal Worker Union. Breaking, we won. After a campaign by the APWU and allied unions, the U.S. Senate has passed the Postal Service Reform Act, which has been artificially bankrupting the Postal Service for decades. This is significant because, for people who remember when under Trump, they were really, really targeting their attacks against the U.S. Postal Service. And again, remember, we all know the arguments. It's a service. It's something that we developed as a common good so that we could be able to send mail across the country without breaking the bank. And let me just read the second bit here. In the last 3 weeks, APWU members placed more than 12,000 calls to the United States Senate demanding the bill's passage. Our unwavering solidarity and bold collective action have paid off and secured the passage of the most significant piece of postal legislation in a generation. And this is huge because if people aren't familiar, what happened with the postal with the post office was that in order to try to kneecap the organization, in order to try to make the postal service seem extremely inefficient, they made they made the union there pay a 75-year pre-funding mandate on, I believe, their pensions, which is absolutely ridiculous. No organization does that. And the sole reason that that was put in there was to chip away at union power, to chip away at the benefits that postal workers get in this country. And it was an extreme burden that they've been suffering under for decades now. And to see that end is a very, very positive win for the union, and also for us as U.S. citizens too, so that we can continue to enjoy and use this service that allows us to be able to send mail and packages to people across the country without paying an arm and a leg. So that's some really good fucking news that we certainly needed at a time when um, at a time when there has just been an unrelenting assault, wow, overwhelming need, um, you know, reliance on the post office, as people have been sort of working from home or going out less, if nothing else. The post office became a really, really needed service for many, many people over the past couple of years, as it has been since its establishment. So that's a really, really encouraging development, I'd have to say. Um, when when you see something like that, it's worth being able to be um, to be happy about it. All right, let's see what's going on. The next, postal banking would definitely be good. And postal banking is one of those. How's it going, Tom? Too, it's good to see you. Postal banking is one of those ideas that really can make a big difference in people's lives. I mean, honestly, like the next time you hear some guy going on about crypto and letting people get access to Web3, ask them if they support postal banking, because if they don't, then you'll then you can know for yourself that that is somebody who's not very, very interested in extending financial products and financial services to people who very much need them. There's so many people who get um, preyed upon by the nastiest services if they don't have access to a bank. Companies that cash people's checks, they take money out of those checks to cash them. People lose out on that. You see it a lot in poor communities. I saw a lot in New York. Those services that allow you to pay your bills in cash, because if you don't have a credit card or a debit card or something like that, it's really really difficult to get through. And for a lot of people who are sort of on that fine line between being banked and unbanked, there is a whole host of really, really nasty predatory services that operate. And the reason they operate like that, this is the cruel reality of the market, is that people who have um, unstable sources of income or very, very low income. Um, a lot of banks, they don't want to end up doing business with them. If you people all know about things like overdraft fees, but hell, a lot of banks in this country will charge you a fee if you have less than $100 in your account. And for a lot of people in this really sick society who are working, that might not always be something that they can guarantee for themselves. To have this kind of basic minimum deposit that they need to not get a fee, which is the most insane thing in the world, to charge somebody a fee a fee for not having money. I mean, it's as nasty as it gets, but that's the logic of capital, right? Because banks operate for profit. They're there to make money, and this is just a reminder of why that system constantly fails um, at providing the necessary services that you need in society. Because look, we do you need to have a debit card in the U.S. at this point. You need to have the ability, to pay for bills, either through bank draft or through a debit card or whatever. That's just how we sort of developed our financial system. And obviously, like, you don't want to have to carry around a shitload of cash, but that comes with hurdles, especially for people who are unbanked, and the traditional banking sector is not going to give people access to that. And then the for-profit system that's trying to fill that hole is just filled with the nastiest motivations to prey on people who don't have very much money to begin with. So that's why you need something like postal banking, because it can allow for a system like the U.S. government, basically, to operate, those basic financial services that people need, without this kind of really nasty for-profit mentality. And I just think it's something that Americans need to get a lot more comfortable with, and we as socialists need to start making those arguments clear to people. Is that, like, it's good to have services that operate without the kind of the very hard constraint of overwhelming market logic. Because, for example, UPS, the postal service does not make um, money necessarily on every letter that it delivers, right? But as a service that provides for us, it's worthwhile having something like that, so that if you want to send a letter to your grandma, it's not going to charge you, $4 or $5 to do it. Hell, if you live in rural America, it's great to be able to have access, to any kind of mail service, because people know this. If they live in rural America, a lot of the other companies, they won't service you out there. There are some really, really there are limitations on the efficiency of markets, and recognizing where those are in a transitionary period is really, really important for us to be able to articulate. And those are victories that we can start winning. Most people can understand the logic of postal banking. Most people can understand the logic, if you present it to them in the right way, the logic of the postal service. The problem is that there's a whole cohort of opponents out there who are willing to make arguments that might seem common sense. People say, like, well, the post office loses money. Well, the post office is not efficient, so maybe we should get rid of it. And if you're not well armed or educated as to the facts why we have something like that, you'll be like, well, I guess, yeah, if it's not making money, then maybe it shouldn't exist, right? But we need to be really public and making those arguments clear to people, because that's the second level step of, not just fighting for basic human dignity in the sense that we're saying, oh, we want to increase workers' power, we want to increase wages, but also recognizing that, like, we want to have a different system that can distribute things, services to people. Um, Read some of these chat messages here, and thanks for the super chat, friend CJS. Where I work, a lot of guys are on weird schedules and live remote and end up cashing their check at places that are always open, and they take a cut. Yeah. I mean, we've all been there. Hell, I mean, I used to work, you know, construction jobs, and I'd have guys ask me to, they endorse a check over to me, and I give them the money because they trusted me. But imagine, I mean, people know. I mean, those industries that really, really um, prey on the poor people who don't have access to traditional financial services. I mean, they're nasty. I mean, could you imagine if you don't have basically the ability, or like the kind of financial security to be able to put a check and be able to hold a bank account for yourself? What that means to lose $15-$20 on a paycheck, or a check for a temporary job that you're doing. All because Bank of America doesn't want you as a customer. I mean, it's a really, really nasty reality here. Um, that, and, like, what are the other ones? The other one is the pay card. You all ever work for a place that gives you, like, a debit card um, for your work instead of a check too? Those things can be pretty interesting as well. Um, we talked about this a little while ago, but let's nationalize our oil. Like Norway, American democracy by for the people should be able to own the resources in our country to benefit the entire population, not just a few oligarchs who abuse us. This was one of the things that was in the platform. We did an episode a few weeks ago, or I guess it was a Griscom stream, where I sort of took us through the founding documents of the Social Democratic Party of America, which then became the Socialist Party, USA. Sorry, the Socialist Party of America, Eugene Debs' party. And in it, they had a platform. This was, what, 1896 or something like that? And in it, they were demanding, one of the key demands was full nationalization of the mineral wealth of this country. Could you imagine an alternate history where all of the oil that was pumped out of the ground across this country, predominantly here in Texas, if that money was going, to fund our services, to fund the common good, instead of just, the few? I mean, it's very controversial, and understandably so. But big universities like University of Texas, they have oil interest, that helps fund people's education, right? And again, like, we want to reduce and our reliance on fossil fuels and transition into a new form of energy. But again, like these are natural resources that should be publicly owned, and it is pretty insane that we've accepted the plundering of our natural resources on its own, but for private gain, absolutely is it's insane. At this point, though, I mean, I support the call, but I'll tell you right now, uh, if we once we have the capacity to do something like that, we have the capacity to do a lot of shit. I mean, these are some of the most entrenched capitalists in the globe. I mean, that's one thing that people need to remember when you see Exxon and Shell put on a nice face is that not only do they not want to see their revenues diminished in the short term. I mean, there is so much money invested in the long term um, extraction of fossil fuels across the globe, and until you start really taking that question seriously, you're not taking the climate crisis seriously, because that is the first and foremost impediment. Is not just like the physical act of pulling the oil out of the ground and burning it up, um, which like that's the physical side of it, but the social side of it is the private ownership and the people whose fortunes are maintained by the continuation of that kind of drilling and burning off of fossil fuels. And if you don't want to, until you start dealing with that fundamental issue, you're not going to get very very far when it comes to fighting climate change. I mean, uh, Lord in heaven, was it Kerry the other day who was saying that like the government won't be able to address climate change? We're going to need to have the oil companies um, on board, and you can see the pretty severe limitations to the Biden administration's plans, for dealing with this crisis. I'm a big proponent of really focusing on our organizing and supporting oil and gas workers across the country, because I think that labor will be really, really critical. But if you think that you're going to have people who have a pretty significant financial interest in continuing to, produce and sell fossil fuels, I mean, we're not going to get much closer, to any kind of solution to this problem. So you have to recognize that that's deep rooted into the system of capitalism there. Um, talking about DeJoy in the post office, before there's lots of coverage spoken of DeJoy dismantling facilities and removing equipment. From what I understand, I mean, the effects there are still pretty significant. I mean, there was a focus on it. I think a lot of it was about Trump in particular. Not that that's unwarranted, um, but yeah, yeah. I mean, like the postal service has been completely, attacked by the Joy, and we have to continue to fight to get rid of him. And this is why these kind of victories for the postal workers union are really important, because that's the only way we're going to be able to start developing, pressure on this system, is by building a political power that can challenge him more directly. I'm coming down. Um, oh, I didn't know this. I'm reacting to this live with y'all. Sounds like Toomey's amendment was included. It will prohibit postal banking. Lord, that's a real shame if that's the case. Sorry, Lord. Thought we were trying to celebrate some things, friend. No, I mean that's really nasty to point. Um, that's really really nasty to include in there if that's the case. But I'm not 100% sure on that. All right, I'm coming down. Here we go. Marina says, following up, Senator Pat Toomey directly or indirectly financial services, including by entering into an agreement with a third party to provide financial services. What? These people are so bought out. It's really insane. Jesus Christ. It's a real bummer. Um, you know, doesn't mean things are done. You can always come at them and fix that later, but that's a real setback. Needless fucking setback. I mean, I don't disagree with this. Would not nationalization of oil make the transition to green energy easier and quicker? I thought like one of the terrible opportunities, sorry, missed opportunities that we had was when the price of gasoline was falling, and the industry was in free fall during the pandemic. I mean, Lord, you wish that we were in power, because that would have been a great opportunity for the United States, if not to seize all of it, to seize like sizable chunks of the oil and gas industry. Um, but what I'm trying to say is not that I think it's a bad idea to nationalize and to take control of these things. I'm just mentioning that fight entails, and to be able to build the capacity to do that. I mean, that's like a final confrontation in my mind, right? I mean, maybe you think differently, but I feel like when we're able to sort of seize things from organizations like Shell and Exxon, I mean, we're pretty close to complete and total victory then. But I mean, if there are opportunities in the meantime, I'm 100% support them. And I think making the argument clear to people is worthwhile. I mean, that's how you get support and get those ideas out there. But um, you know, I have a hard time imagining being able to do that before we build up a lot of other capacities. But I do think it should be part of the platform, no doubt about it. I 100% agree with it. I'm just saying, building up the political capabilities of doing that, the political power to do that. I think there's going to be a lot in between. Um, Comrade Strom says taking on the forces of green primitivism is a component struggle of this larger struggle. I mean, I think so too. I mean, the you mean like the small is beautiful folks. I want to. People should read as much of Matt Huber's work as you're able to. I'm really looking forward to his book coming out, I believe, in May. I can't remember the title, but it's going to be about working class politics and the climate movement. Um, but this is one of those things that like really worries me here is you're starting to see all of the, not to pile on her, for example, but AOC when she was here, she was talking about decentralized solar grids as a solution, potentially for the crisis here in Texas. Like, no, 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 no. We want to have big electrical systems. This is something that you really one because it's more cost effective in the long run, and two, because if you start creating movements where people are going to opt out of our public systems, of our communal systems, you're going to have a rich person's grid and you're going to have a poor person's grid. And like necessity for a very long time necessitated that we create larger grids and electrical systems. But as you're seeing privatization logic, particularly here in Texas, but all across the country, you saw that in the 90s and 2000s of creating competing different energy producers and having choice to who your energy provider is. And you're seeing that kind of finalize in a kind of green movement to have these kind of small decentralized grids. I mean, the idea, the selling of like powering just your house and having solar batteries. Like, I'm not against the technology in and of itself, but you can see that like this is another way to isolate the super wealthy from the rest of us, so that they have well maintained functioning systems, right? Privatized systems, and the rest of us, fuck them, right? I mean, we were talking a second ago about how difficult it is for working class people, to cash a check or to pay their bills because they're sort of left out of the financial system. Can you imagine something that's actually like physical infrastructure, like electricity? If we create a system where, like, oh yeah, this nice neighborhood, they got a whole beautiful solar grid and it's well maintained and well funded, so they are opting out of the larger state or local electrical grid, and so that means less revenue, less money. And really, the only people who need a state system are the poor people. So, I mean, what that means. That means underfunding, underdevelopment. Again, like the scientific engineering level, it's absurd and a huge waste of resources to create a bunch of competing grids alone. But you can also see what the political ramifications of that shit are going to be. And it's really, really dangerous because that kind of small is beautiful logic is not just unique to climate stuff, but you can see, I mean, it's a very kind of popular Americanism at this point, especially amongst people on the left. And like, Lord, you can see that very much represented the climate movement, and that needs to stop if we want to be serious about handling this problem. Man, and Marina with another update about Toomey. Toomey just introduced an amendment to prohibit postal banking and end the money order service USPS already provides. Jesus Christ! I mean, fucking I hate people like this so much. Because I used to use the money order system myself when I was getting paid cash, both for construction work and when I was bartending. Because you come out at the end of the day with all this, cash money in your pocket, and I could turn it into a money order and transfer it over to my bank. Um, Jesus, that's so. That's something else. Because I'm just saying, like those are already lifelines that the postal service provides to people. Um, I'm just coming down. I've not. Thank you for the chat. Left his best says, "Have you watched Ukraine on Fire?" I have not yet. I'm not familiar with that actually, so I have not seen it. Is that a? I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen it. Let me see. What's capacity? These are a little disjointed. I'm sorry, because I'm about 4 minutes behind y'all on questions. But Hawaii says, "What capacity would you build up first? What's your priority list?" Um, I think that's in reference to me talking about some because people bring it up nationalizing the oil industry. Um, I mean, for like, just think about what that would entail, right? So that would entail having a government that was willing to do it, right? Having public support that was demanding it and was willing to, focus on that demand and even show up potentially if called upon. Um, and three, having developing the state capacities to take over industries, which is something the United States has done from time to time, but it's not a power that they wield very often. Because this country has been sort of run in a certain way for a long while. So you would have to, for example, build up a capacity, of political language and political systems that would bring things from private ownership into public ownership, right? And that could be, for example, a system where it's just a straight up seizure, right? Where, hey, y'all, you're not charged anymore. We're coming in, leave, right? Or you could do things like public buyouts where, you basically are buying out companies, and you can do that in a couple different ways. You could do that in a way that like, oh, we're just competing with any other company to maybe buy you out. Do you accept our offer? Or saying, here's the offer, you have to accept it, right? Which is like a kind of like nicer version of like a seizure, right? You can imagine the headlines and the way people would react to that in this country. So you have to have the capacity that would be able to handle that. That capacity means one, both creating like the kind of legal framework, the political um, the political norms that make that kind of action seem acceptable to most people. You would have to create the kind of public support, public understanding of what we're doing, making people understand, for example, because you can only imagine what the right wing would do in that situation, saying like, well, if they can come after Exxon, they can come after your car wash, right? And we would have to make the understanding that like we're not taking these things away from folks. We're giving them to the public, right? You have to do a lot of kind of political and ideological work to get to that point, right? And that's something that takes time to develop, right? There's no like easy chart or map to building up those kind of political capacities. But the first things that need to happen um, is you need to not just have a working class movement in the sense that like people are doing things who are in the working class, but a movement that understands themselves as not just a constituency, but like the constituency and movement of political change. People need to understand themselves as workers, and that being the first and foremost political kind of identity. From there, you need to be able to build out some kind of stronger party apparatus, system apparatus, so that you can win power or take power. There's just a lot of steps that need to be built up before you can start, seizing or nationalizing things. Um, when you look at countries that, when you look at countries that, for example, have like national oil reserves, those came out of understandings that aren't foreign to the U.S. For example, in Texas, you have surface rights and mineral rights, and those came out of, the kind of weird combination that you have, particularly in Texas, of Spanish law and more, English/American law, right? Those systems merged here, where you had contracts and deeds that separated those things, because in Spain the king basically owned whatever was underneath what you had. The state owned it effectively, afterwards, right? And that ended up continuing into the system here, where there was a period of time when the state of Texas actually owned a significant chunk of the mineral wealth, but they got rid of that towards the end of the 19th century, long before really people were thinking about stuff like oil as something that they, was very valuable. So like there's a historical reason that that didn't end up developing there, but um, you know that's a track that a lot of other countries sort of followed in a different way, right? They had that tradition, and when they discovered the reserves, they kept them. Other people have seized those, and the seizure, or the buying out, or the making public or democratizing, whatever you want to call it. That takes a very different kind of historical trajectory, and movement to develop. Um, yeah. Let me see. I'm following down. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down to grab some more questions, yo. Let me see. Jesus. I'm sorry to hear this too. You YouTube says, I used to walk so far in the heat to Walmart because my bank wanted to charge some ridiculous fee for a money order. Chase Bank, no, I mean those are the worst. Um, I should probably say what my bank is publicly, but um, I've been lucky to have one that doesn't charge things like that. But Lord, I had the Capital One account for a little bit. That was a nightmare. It's really crazy, some of the stuff that they do to people's personal bank accounts, and the kind of hurdles that you get, and you only really recognize those things when you're really living paycheck to paycheck, which is why I think a lot of people don't get it, because they think, well, why don't you go get a bank account, right? Everybody can do it. My kid has a savings account, but all of those accounts, they typically have minimum rates with them. And it's great if you could find one that doesn't have that. Um, but for a lot of people, not having, some people, they need to be able to pull all their money out of a bank account, without having a fee attached to that. And that's a big problem. And also like the physical infrastructure that you're talking about, imagine if you weren't able to walk to a Walmart, or to another producer, you would either have to pay or maybe not bank with Chase, right? Um, and that's why it's just so insane to be against postal banking. Like, it just makes the system healthier, for fuck's sake. It's not even like, that's just like straight up just punishing poor people at a certain point. And the fact that, um, you know, uh, the banks make a shitload of money off of those financial fees too. That's just being a complete stooge, and stepping stool for those people. Let me see. Why says, do U.S. socialists resist DAPL, Dakota Access Pipeline? Um, because it threatens natural resources and indigenous sovereignty, or because they'd like to be the boss instead of the capitalists. Well, um, I think I think it's certainly both, in the sense of, people oppose DAPL, and those other kind of pipelines, because they are privately controlled. Um, And what that means is they threaten natural resources and indigenous communities. I mean, there is a decision, for example, when these pipelines get, where these pipelines get built is a political decision. Um, And it's typically a decision of what people are the weakest in this society, what people are not going to be able to mount up a strong defense against it. Oh, well, this community, we think that we can sort of put their drinking water at risk, and that's the case across the country. I mean, that's what's happened across the country is that the need and the motivation for profit for profit's sake, it supersedes any kind of morals that you would have. And I would much rather be in a situation or a society where if we do have infrastructure, like let's just say for a second, drop climate change things, all that. Like let's say like there is necessary infrastructure that needs to be built somewhere. Um, that could have some detrimental effects. Would you not prefer that be decided in a kind of open and democratic way, to develop ways to, prevent like the worst outcomes, to prevent, to develop ways to maybe, compensate people fairly, instead of what happens now, where you have a bunch of big oil lawyers showing up, harassing and abusing people, and sending goons. I mean, like the stuff that you've seen when it comes to the pipeline protests, and even the communities that the pipeline goes through, is absurd, right? You would much rather see those things being publicly controlled in a much more public and democratic way than they currently are. Than having them, be kind of private with a little bit of, government say, right? And you see those processes, where the government, because the government does have to approve them and all that kind of stuff. But you see how limited that is. You see who's really having invited into the conversations around that. That's not everyday normal people. That's lobbyists, and maybe a couple token activists, right? You don't want these things to be privately controlled, because our ability to influence them to prevent these horrible, horrible outcomes is extremely limited. You look at what happened. I mean, Jesus Christ. Was it in, I mean, there's so many of these, but was it in Dakota recently? Or I guess Jesus Christ, this might have been like 3, 4 years ago. Because this was like early TMBS. But they had that massive oil spill from one of those pipelines, that was polluting like one of the largest reservoirs in the country. Um, and it was just, when you looked at it, it was the most clear, and apparent, like, disinvestment and disinterest from those people who were responsible for maintaining it, because they realized they didn't have any real financial incentive or need, to prevent those kind of spills. I mean, look at what happened here in Texas, right, where you have an infrastructure system here when it comes to our energy grid, that is not only not weatherized, it's incoherent, because you have competing lines going against each other. Because I mean, if you don't know this, like the energy price system here works. Now I'm in Austin, where we still have public power, but we're still connected to the larger grid, so we're exposed to these kind of failures. But there are people who are in areas where they call the Lord in heaven. Um, She's not decentralized. What's the word for it? My brain's not working right now, folks. But in the deregulated areas, right? Where it's all privatized, you get to pick your electricity provider. I mean, you have like competing lines going out there. I mean, that's just a waste of resources. And then you looked at what ended up happening here. I mean, the reason you had the power failures was because the natural gas lines weren't weatherized. And why weren't they? Because even though they understood that there was a risk of something like this happening, they recognize they said, like, well, at the end of the day, this will happen. We'll lose power for a period of time. We won't be able to transport natural gas for a period of time, and we'll lose some money, but it will be less money than what we would lose from properly preparing the system for disaster. Right? That's like your life, right? If you're a Texan, like that's your life that some jackass is making decisions about, to line their pockets and their friends' pockets, right? That's not okay. That's where democracy. I'm sorry. That's where capitalism is at a head, right? It's in direct conflict with any kind of concept of democracy, having a say over yourself, having a say over your community, having a say over your future, right? Private ownership completely smashes that kind of system. So we want to be in control of these for a bunch of different reasons, and not just because it's some kind of moral thing, because, oh, it's tainted. It's like, well, look, this is what ends up happening, because that system has different goals than a publicly controlled system. Um, all right, I am scrolling down. I'm not a Citibank guy. Is that the one that has like the little cafe? Right? Am I right about that? What's the one, or is it Capital One that they built all those like places you can get a cappuccino and a loan? That's dark shit, man. Um, Left is best wants to know: did Michael Brooks think the CIA was involved with Lava Jato and Bolivia coup? Um, so, I mean, well, he definitely knew that there was FBI involvement in Lava Jato. Um, I think we didn't know for sure about what was going on the ground in Bolivia, other than the fact that like it's very clear that the United States State Department, um, had a position there. I mean, the CIA this is one of those things where it's just like I can tell you, I can just remember conversations that I specifically had, right? And then there's like that's like there's a limit there, and then there's things I can imagine, and I try to be careful about not trying to you know you can't speak for somebody like that in a situation like this, but I think for sure that he had feelings. I mean, he definitely knew that there's U.S. involvement in both of those things. I think what department. It's not too much of a logical leap to think that the CIA at least had some was aware, if not involved, in both of those things. It's been clear now that the U.S. government was. Um, but that's that. And to the second one, did he have an opinion on the Azov battalion C-14 or other neo-Nazi groups resurgence in Ukraine? I mean, other than the kind of general recognition that they existed and were something to look out for and to note as a development there, um, we didn't have any conversation that went deeper than that. So, all right, all right. I am scrolling down. No, I mean nothing's off topic, y'all. I appreciate the chat too. Like nothing's off topic. I'm happy to, Michael stuff. It's like I can. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions about that. I just like I've wanted to be very like, because I really one thing that really pisses me off that a lot of people do with him and his memory is they ascribe a lot of shit to him. Um, you know, and sometimes it's not even out of bounds or like ridiculous, but it's just like I know you don't know, and I just would prefer you not. I'm not talking to you, but like I see people who like really didn't know him. I mean, like I'm not even saying I'm the one who who knew him the best or the final authority. I just know that because of the way that we work together, because we worked so closely on writing the show for TMBS, like all those commentaries were like we get on the phone and we talk about them for a couple hours, like because that show had such a wide range of topics, like we talked about a lot of things. So there are some things that conversations that I've had that I remember, but I just think it's like we were going to do a book for a little bit, and I decided against doing it because I just as confident as I can feel personally about because we were writing a book together, Michael and I, before he passed away, and we wanted to finish it. But as I really sat down, it's like you know there's like what we had here, and there's what I know, and to put that on a piece of paper as a kind of final definitive thing, even though I feel very confident in what I feel was shared thoughts, it's like you shouldn't do that. So anyways, that's just sort of my feeling on some of these things. So I'm happy to 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 remind folks and to tell stories and things like that, but there's a wall that I don't want to cross sometimes, if that makes sense. When it comes to like it wasn't something explicit, I don't like to um, you know guesstimate too much publicly. Privately might be different, but appreciate the question though. And I say something awful about this, Awesome Possum. Awesome Possum says, I've been warning my family members who decide to move to Texas. Lovely state, culture, and wonderful people, I'll add. But the legislators are horrible. I mean, not just, I mean, just criminal at this point, and monstrous. And I hate to say that, like, I hope that we win out, but like, I can also see things getting a hell of a lot worse. There's a cynical side of me that every time something bad happens with the legislature, I'm like, all right, well, maybe you know the kind of rich California folks or wherever they come from, folks who came out here because they didn't want to pay taxes might get a little dissuaded. But no, I mean the government here is the thing that's so frustrating too about the government of Texas is that there is such a anti-democratic streak, and I don't just mean that in the sense of um, the very real sense that like they're attacking people's right to vote and things like that. But the way that what's happened under Greg Abbott in particular, but this started with Bush and really extended with Rick Perry, has been this extreme growth in the executive authority of the governor, right? Which, for people who aren't familiar with Texas politics or Texas history, like Texas traditionally and purposefully was set up to to be a weak governor state, where the power really needed to be with the legislature, and the legislature is extremely reactionary. But there was a kind of limit, or at least in theory, like the legislature is like one of the more influence, like one that you can get more influence in, right? Because one person wins the governor race, right? Um, but in the legislature, even if one party is in power, you can have opposition, right? So it's not like one controlled the body, but that there's been a pretty extreme move to executive authority, and I mean it's pretty much just been taken by Abbott, and there has been a pushback against it. Ironically, a lot of the powers that he's really using and enjoying now all come from a state of emergency that he put in place for around COVID, and he used that state of emergency to stop any kind of COVID restrictions or response from the government. But he expanded his political power immensely, um, and not just like on the question of COVID, but what he really did was target uh, the local governments and city governments in a way that I just think is extremely anti-democratic. I mean, Republicans love to talk about small government, but whenever they have executive authority, they love to use that power to completely smash any other kind of localities. I mean, the limitations on what you can do as a city in the state of Texas are absurd, given the fact that Houston, Austin, Dallas, El Paso. I mean, these are San Antonio. I'm going to list all the cities, but these are big cities, and are growing and are having very serious questions at how they want to run themselves. And what he's done to basically limit cities' abilities to control their own destiny is really insane. And there's a limit to how much you can point to the hypocrisy when it comes to conservatives, but it really truly is something else. All right. Let me see. I'm trying to roll down to the bottom. Left is best wants to know if I think Cisneros will beat Quellar. I hope so. And I think I think she's got a really good shot. I mean, she's come close now a lot. I worry that the runoff election might skew a little bit more. Um, you know, uh, you know, might skew more in the direction of voters, who would be more sympathetic to Quellar. But um, I mean, I think Cisneros is like really has walked a great line of like being adamant about the kind of social issues, and particularly the right to abortion and the fight against um, the monstrous attack on trans people here. She's been able to merge that, I think, with a very, very strong like economic pro worker message, and I hope that that synthesis works. Um, for her, because I think this is going to be a really important election, regardless of how true it is or not. This will be an election that people will point to one way or the other, to sort of prove their kind of political strategy, which one is right or wrong. And what I worry you're seeing from the Democratic Party, like I think they're going to get completely washed in 2022. And Lord in heaven, if they can find a way to, attack progressives over that, they certainly will. So it's really important to notch up victories in this cycle, I think. But um, I mean, from what I've seen, it's like it's looking pretty solid for her. I think that like it's just is going to need a kind of sustained effort. Luckily, um, I think that there's enough national attention on it now. And since Greg walked away with his election here, you can put a lot of resources into shoring up that election for her. So yeah, I mean, fingers crossed. We'll see. I mean, I think she certainly has a good shot, and certainly rooting for her myself. Um, because I'm telling you though, what they think that what is really worrying for me is that you're seeing what's going on in South Texas and the way the Democratic Party is responding to that is one to just continue to ignore the people there and their actual like material needs. Like the Democratic Party does not show up for them, and Quellar is like amazing because this is somebody who like he's like, well, I know my community, and people, I know what people of my community want. And this is a guy who's the FBI is investigating him because he has had like shady dealings with the government of Azerbaijan, right? I hate to not sound like a citizen of the world here, but I can tell you right now that that is something that is not at all reflective of the typical life experience of people in his district, right? Um, I think hitting on that should hopefully be really influential and useful in tilting it, the election in her direction. But beyond that, I mean, like he sort of represents what I think the Democratic Party is so willing to do, which is to completely throw uh, you know working people, um, queer people, women under the bus. It's funny, the whole Bernie bro thing. Remember that? The Bernie guys, they're racist and sexist, right? Which was complete nonsense, right? From the get go. But remind me, what is the party that is so fixated in a lot of parts of the country to run opposed to women to the right to abortion? What is the party that thinks that it's very worthwhile for years and years and years to be hostile to like very very basic reforms like legalizing gay marriage? Was that the Bernie section of the Democratic Party, or was that the DNC? Right. Remind me which part of the party is so quick to throw away these values that they apparently hold so dear to, when they think that is politically expedient. I'll tell you what group it's not. It's not the kind of progressive Bernie Sanders wing of the party. Like these are people who have been very committed to all of these things from the get go. It's just amazing that they still like throw that accusation around. But I do get worried, frankly, because you know what you could end up happening is like a continued drift on the Democratic Party in some of those districts to holding on to sort of reactionary positions, which only like lays the ground out perfectly for an even stronger right wing, conservative candidate to start winning those districts. And I mean that could be really really devastating, not just for the state politics in Texas, but for the nation. Um, Well, I'm happy to take some more of these questions. I see a chat here. I might have to leave in a moment, but um, it's always nice to hear from it. Co-fan says, New Year channel, would love to know what was the political process that brought you to the left. I mean, a few things. I mean, like, there's like, I mean, when I became a socialist was a very specific moment, but, I grew up in the South. I grew up working class and poor. And I had a healthy distrust of the system and authority, though. Um, there was an embarrassing but notable period of my high school life when I was sort of on the right in the sense I was like I don't know, I probably was like a libertarian, because I grew up in a queer community, so I was never willing to break from any of those kind of issues. But I was sort of like, oh, the market, it works and all that, that kind of crap. But I realized very quickly that they didn't really have much for me. In the sense of solutions to the struggles that I was experiencing, my family was experiencing my whole life. I think the moments that really started to shift for me was when I first started working concrete. jobs. And my first day on the job, or it wasn't my first day, it was like week or, first week or something like that. Um, we had laid the foundations, and it was me, just like a young white kid, who, now you can realize what this was. I was brought in not as a scam because this wasn't unionized labor, but I was brought in to be cheap labor to replace more expensive skilled labor, right? Um, and I worked on a crew. I was the only white guy on the crew. The other guys were, black South Carolinians, and immigrant labor, right? And on the we had laid the foundations, and there was a day when it was time to pour concrete. And to do that, you need special equipment. Particularly for me, I needed special concrete boots, right? Boots that I could wear, that weren't going to get stuck or fucked up while we were pouring concrete. So my boss asked me if I had them, and I said, of course not. So he took me to Walmart and he bought them, and they were like $75. And he said, I'm going to take those out of your paycheck. At the end of when you pay you. I showed back up at the work site, and the rest of the crew walked up to me, and they said, did he make you pay for those? And I said, yeah, he's just said he was going to, take them out of my paycheck. And they looked at me and they said, does he make you pay for the shovel? Does he make you pay for the concrete? These are the tools that you need to get the job done. He shouldn't be charging you. And I said, yeah, I guess you're right. And they all walked over to him and they said, we're not going to pour this concrete. Until say that you're not going to take money out of this kid's paycheck for the for the equipment that he needs to do the job that you hired him to do. And it was just a really clear cut moment for me, of realizing what side I was on. you know, despite all of the kind of differences between us. We were all workers on this crew. And not only that, but when we stand up for each other, like, we win and we make life better, right? Because they were looking out for me on a moral level, but they were also looking out for me on a self-interested level, because they don't want to start seeing not only cheap labor showing up on their site, but also people who the boss feels comfortable hyper exploiting and abusing, because that's going to come home to them soon, right? And that was a really defining moment in my life. And later, Occupy was really helpful in, sort of crystallizing a critique of capitalism in general. And from then on out, I started to read more socialist work, and met socialists who introduced me to different ideas. And, it happened pretty quickly from then on out. But that was sort of my general trajectory, I would say. But I appreciate the question. It's fun. I love that story, even though I know it's about me, but it really was a sweet moment. Thanks so much for the chat there. Thanks so much. Left is best. Democrat system is rigged. You don't need to look too much further than that to see that they're not really interested in democracy. Thank you so much, Kowalski, for the super chat as well. And I appreciate the questions. Left is best. I mean, it's always nice to hear from all of y'all. Yeah, concrete, that pretty much always sucks, especially when the mud shows up and the dudes get the view. I'll tell you, concrete was some of the hardest work I've ever done in my life, especially and I was doing it in the summer too. It's like 100 degrees. Like, we didn't have any real protections when it came to, like, forced water breaks or anything like that. I mean, it was intense. But it was cool. I mean, that was that was always it was fun. I love building things. I think that's one thing I miss the most. I don't miss the hours or the pay. Though, I mean, that kind of labor was a lot better than waiting tables or anything like that. I know. I mean, like, I feel like I got really lucky with that one, because that's not the case at most of these sites. It certainly wasn't the case that there are other places I had worked, but those guys were looking out, and I thought that was something else. Well, y'all, I think that might be a good a place as any. I love chatting, but I got to run. I'll be hanging out tomorrow. We got our interview with Natalie Scher coming up. Ben Burgess in the post game. So sign up at patreon.com/leftreckoning to join for that. Get your questions into Ben, and I'll see you tomorrow, 7 Central. Take care, y'all.